Hello all. We're having a little bit of technical difficulty, so I think you guys can hear us, but you can't see our screen right now. So if you could just hang tight while we try to problem solve this quickly. All right, so we believe that you can now see the webinar. Thank you for your patience. If anyone is having any problems hearing us or seeing the webinar on your screen, please send us a little chat in the chat box, and we'll try to make sure that we can get that for you. But thank you again for joining us. This is the 2018 CoC Monitoring Information webinar. Today it'll be presented by Jennifer Fabrini, sorry about that, Renee Crolius, and Steve Gaddis, sorry. We are excited to have you with us this afternoon. So the three of us will be your main monitoring team. Steve is our CFO, and I am the CoC Senior Program Manager, and Jennifer is our CoC Program Coordinator. A little bit of housekeeping. The webinar will be recorded and posted to All Chicago's Learning Management System. Again, if you're having any audio or visual issues, you can either click the raise the hand icon or use the question chat box to submit questions at the bottom. We will have question and answer at the end of the webinar, but throughout the presentation, if you have questions, feel free to submit them so we can work on those as they're coming in. We hope to have enough time at the end to answer all of the questions, but if not, we will make sure that we follow up individually. And do you see that there is somebody that has their hand raised? So we will get to a couple of you that seem to potentially have your hands raised, and otherwise we will keep, okay. A couple of people without audio. Give us 1 second. Robrette, can you hear us? I've unmuted you so you can talk to us. All right, so we will keep working on the audio issue. If there are more people that can't hear us, please send us a message so we can see if there's more than just a couple. So moving on from housekeeping, the agenda today, we're first going to just talk about the monitoring background a little bit, and then we're going to move into the CoC program monitoring process policy, and then the financial monitoring process policy. Additionally, we'll go over some of the post-monitoring procedures, talk about SurveyGizmo, next steps, and some frequently asked questions. So a little bit about the monitoring background. A lot of you are very familiar that our CoC had formerly done monitoring in more of the context of site visits. Site visits were first introduced in the 2014 HUD competition or CoC evaluation process. And that was as a way to reduce the amount of documentation that was required to be submitted. So as many of you know and just experienced, there are checklists in both the agency and project component, and in the past, all of the policies in the checklist were submitted to All Chicago for review. When the site visit started, that was no longer submitted to us at the time of the local evaluation, but the site visits were an ability for us to kind of do a spot check and review those policies at a later time. That process was developed by the site visit subcommittee of the former HUD-McKinney-Vento Committee, or HMV, and they reconfirmed those in 2015 and 2016 by the evaluation subcommittee. So for the past few years, we've been operating under kind of the site visit process that was established in 2014, and that was an attempt to allow for just a more robust evaluation process that aims to support providers in their work and provide opportunities for TA, and a little bit less heavy on some of the policy review. However, we saw a need for making some changes in the most recent years. So the site visit process does not achieve the current HUD monitoring requirements as part of the CoC program regulations. And we received a lot of feedback from providers and participants, in addition to just doing an analysis of the site visit process, where few tangible outcomes resulted from the execution of the annual site visits. As I just mentioned, since we were really looking at a lot of the policies that were submitted in the checklist, as you may know, the checklist isn't actually scored, and so if the agencies that were selected for site visits were selected based on scoring low, our time was being spent looking at policies that didn't impact their score. So, you know, as a result of that, there was not really a clear record of improvement in the subsequent years for the projects that received the site visits, and the document checklist, really used as the backbone, has been unsuccessful in achieving the desired outcomes. Additionally, our process had really an excessive administrative burden that really limited the review capacity each year, and we're really looking at wanting to expand how many monitoring reviews we're able to do, and we're looking at making those changes in order to do that. So in February of 2018, All Chicago presented some pilot recommendations to SPEC and received approval to move forward with a process for 2018. SPEC will continue to provide oversight of this process, and so as a result of just talking to SPEC, we had a smaller work group that was established that met between March and April 3 times. And this work group was composed of different service providers that either were members from SPEC or from the HMV committee that helped create the initial site visit process. We also had service providers covering the various program model types, and service providers that received a site visit in this most recent year that could really share their feedback on what worked and what didn't work. So this work group really weighed in on both the program and financial monitoring components, the tools, and the policies, which was a really, really great opportunity for us to get feedback on the process. So in April this month, we presented the 2018 program monitoring policy and the financial policy to SPEC for final feedback. So some of the key changes really are that we're going to be approaching financial monitoring and program monitoring in a separate way. So in the past site visits, if you did receive a site visit, you automatically received both components, kind of regardless of your local evaluation score or whether or not you really needed both. So this year, a different group of agencies is selected for financial and program monitoring based on different selection criteria, and we are really only seeing a small number of an overlap. So we're seeing that kind of rings true to the fact that we may have been doing program monitoring or financial monitoring for a project that maybe didn't necessarily need it. Additionally, from the feedback received from the agencies that received site visits, we incorporated a new 3-tier monitoring system for program monitoring that really offers flexibility in completing the required tasks. We're going to go over the 3-tiered monitoring system for the program monitoring in a little bit, but we are really excited about being able to understand some of the flexibility and just the changes that our system has over time. Some additional key changes include that our on-site program monitoring will only be performed to review client charts, and that's something that we didn't have the capacity to do before and was really missing from our site visit process. HUD specifically requested that we pay more attention to client charts, looking at eligibility and housing documents and inspections. So we're excited about being able to add that in, and kind of on the flip side, instead of going on site to read your policies, we're allowing the ability for you to submit policies for us to read at our own desks, and that you don't have to potentially print them if they're already electronic. Additionally, if you're familiar with the old process, we had really 3 different components. And the other 2 components, the consumer engagement sessions and the peer interviews, for the purpose of 2018, have been unlinked from the monitoring process in order to really expand the capacity and ease the administrative burden, and to make those 2 components stronger and potentially expanded for our system. And then we believe that the change this year will allow us to have a deeper review to ensure compliance with HUD and HARS regulations, as well as CoC and system priorities. We also feel that we have the right people, such as Steve, looking at the financial part instead of someone like me in a program mind, looking at control grids, I believe. So we're hoping that this results in better outcomes for everybody. So just a really quick overview before we go deeper into each of the monitoring components. But our financial monitoring overview here is that this will be conducted by our All Chicago Finance Department and led by Steve. And 10 agencies will be selected based on the compliance risk score that was calculated in the 2018 local evaluation. And in addition to that, the financial review will really be looking at the supporting documentation of the 10 grant management questions from the local evaluation documentation checklist. And those will all be able to be submitted electronically via SurveyGizmo for review. For the program monitoring overview, this will still be conducted by about 2 to 4 members from our All Chicago CoC program staff and our HMIS staff. We also are selecting 10 to 12 agencies based on the established selection criteria for the program monitoring. And as we mentioned, there's a 3-tiered approach, and so those methods include a self-assessment, which is new this year, a desk audit, which is the checklist that we talked about from the local evaluation, and then an on-site client file review, which is also new this year. So just kind of as a summary, the following monitoring components draw upon the evaluation instrument checklist, and in these components, the monitored agencies are requested to upload the documentation that they indicated having on file during the local evaluation. So our financial review and then the program monitoring desk audit is where we're doing that spot check of the questions that you marked yes to in the local evaluation. So as a reminder, if you're attending the webinar because you were notified that your agency will receive monitoring in 2018, the email specifically indicated whether you were receiving a financial monitoring, a program monitoring, or both. We attached both policies, but we want to make sure that you are aware that the email specifically says which component you are receiving. And then just to keep in mind that the selection process and the monitoring methods are different for the program and financial monitoring. So we just want to make sure that we are as clear as possible in regards to which component and why you were selected. All right. So we're going to take a little bit more of a dive into the program monitoring policy that you should have received. And we just wanted to highlight some of the selection principles. Really the biggest piece of our criteria is that your agency has not been monitored recently. And when we mean you haven't been monitored recently, we mean that you haven't received a CoC site visit since the site visit process was rolled out in 2014. So, so that kind of narrows down. As you can see, it took us a few years to get through all of our agencies. And so basically, if your agency is left in that pool, we are likely touching you this year. Additionally, we did have some other selection criteria that is related to information we gathered from the local evaluation process, and we understand that that's based off of your preliminary scorecard, but we are looking at concerns with adherence to HUD guidelines or some performance concerns. And when we're saying concerns, we, of course, this is kind of in comparison to your peers. So just if you scored a bit lower compared to your peers, or if we were seeing some concerns as it relates to potentially your housing first policy that was submitted. If it wasn't exactly what we were looking for, then we want to flag that and be able to offer you some additional TA and one-on-one support to get that stronger. This is the full list, the steps that we took in order to do the selection criteria. And we really worked with the work group back and forth to make sure that this made sense and seemed fair. So what you'll see at the top there is what we already mentioned about. So if you haven't received a site visit in the last 3 years, or if the agency will be visited by HUD in this current year. So we were able to have some communication with them because we didn't want to overburden an agency to get monitored by both the CoC and HUD in the same calendar year. So we're trying to avoid that as much as we can. Additionally, in the local evaluation policy, there's a policy that says any project that scored 2 standard deviations below the mean should be selected for monitoring, and so that is the additional criteria. And then, as we mentioned before, anyone that was flagged for housing first compliance concern, or and then we really started to look at just projects scoring lower, so about in the bottom 10 in 2017 and 2018. We also looked at if the project did not fill any of their turnover units with coordinated entry referrals, and then we also just went down to randomly selecting agencies. So we're really interested, as much as you may not be that excited about monitoring, we are excited about it. It really helps us get to learn more about our projects and our agencies, and allows us to support other projects and agencies that reach out for help. And really, if we had the capacity to do everybody, we would want to. And so the selection criteria to us doesn't matter as much as us just being able to come out and speak with you. So, but for transparency, that is how you were selected this year. However, the work group actually thought that the changes were in a direction that they were excited about as well. And so we talked about leaving 2 slots open remaining for agencies to self-identify, to self-select being monitored this year. You may know that you're an agency that hasn't received a site visit in the last 3 years and maybe just want to get it over with. Or you are really interested in the new self-assessment and are interested in receiving some TA this year, or maybe had some turnover with your financial team and could really use just Steve's eyes on some of your stuff. So We wanted to offer this. We do have a deadline of May 15th, so we have a self-selection form via SurveyGizmo where you can select the different components that you might be interested in receiving. If we, of course, don't get anyone, we still want to do 12 visits or 12 reviews, at least for the program side. So we will be going through the process of just following our selection criteria, which means we'll just randomly select the last two slots. But we're hoping to get some interest. Also, some additional selection considerations. We are trying to continue to build our relationship with our local HUD office, and so if HUD requests that we monitor an agency due to a particular concern that arises, that agency could be selected, and then as I mentioned before, we will just go through our selection criteria if no spots are filled through the self-selection. Okay, so, and I did want to say the self-selection form is also, we'll talk at the end a little bit more, but we do have all of our policies and handouts and tools and that self-selection SurveyGizmo link on our website under monitoring. So all of this will be there at the that you guys can take a look at as well. So moving on to the three methods under the program monitoring, we've talked a little bit about this. So the self-assessment, we're going to have all of the agencies that have been selected complete the self-assessment. The desk audit, most projects, if not all, will do the desk audit, and then the on-site file review will be some of the projects. We may not be able to have enough capacity to do all of the projects that have been selected. So just a little bit of information about how we're going to determine which method your agency receives. So again, all agencies will complete the self-assessment. Most, if not all, agencies will receive the desk audit, and if you're on here and you know you're getting it, you should just assume that you will do both the self-assessment and the desk audit. And then again, All Chicago will determine which projects will receive the on-site client file review based on our capacity, but also we have a goal of piloting the review for each of the program types. And so because each of the tools is a little bit unique to each program type, and then of course we'll take into consideration the selection reasons as well. So to talk about a little bit more about the self-assessment, this will be completed in SurveyGizmo, and it's really giving you guys an opportunity to reflect, identify some of your strengths and weaknesses, potentially develop steps to improve, and especially steps to improve in the local evaluation score if there are areas that you scored lower in. Our work group had a lot of really great feedback about how different agencies have done different types of self-assessments before, and gives you an opportunity where you know that there is no punitive findings. It's really a place where you can say, you know, do we have a policy about this, but do we also put this into practice, or is this something we've been meaning to get to, but we haven't yet, and we could potentially use some additional support from All Chicago to get there. So we're excited about getting some feedback about how the self-assessment works for you guys. And what you'll see is some of the topics include our just intake and termination procedures, data collection and quality, staff development, policies and procedures, and services. So part of this was grown out of different self-assessments that are just like out there right now that can be used, but it's also it was also developed out of some of the lessons we learned from the site visit process, where we spent a lot of time with our TA and some of our discussions, and just areas that continue to be brought up as areas of interest in our system. The desk audit will be completed in SurveyGizmo. So projects will be asked to submit documentation to support 20 of the questions that are answered in the local evaluation checklist. That will be some of the questions from the agency component and some from the project component. And then you guys are well aware, but topics include in the checklist, again, staff policies and procedures, HMIS policies and procedures, consumer focus and participation, grant management, housing quality and standards, resource linkages, etc. We do ask that when you're submitting, if you submit manuals or really anything over like 5 pages and we're expected to read the entire policy, we would appreciate that you guys highlight the specific sections that we're looking at. That might not always be possible, but it's just something that would be helpful for us as reviewers. And then unlike the self-assessment, there will be findings with the desk audit, and items that are marked as findings are really just items that we could not verify. And any findings that we find will be noted in the summary report that's sent back to you, and that's just an area for us to recommend some updates. Okay. So moving on to the on-site file review, All Chicago will schedule a date to complete the file review on-site at the agency. We are looking to review 6 to 10 of your client files. We will be focusing on the appropriate documentation for eligibility, housing, and supportive services. And we're also going to be doing some cross-referencing with HMIS for areas such as the consent form, enrollment dates, move-in dates, housing status, and income. And similarly, any findings that we couldn't verify will be noted in a summary report. Generally speaking, the client files that we'll be looking at will be more recent, and we will be providing those client IDs to you prior to us coming on site. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Steve so he can talk to you guys a little bit more about the financial monitoring policy.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Steve Gatis. I'm the CFO here at All Chicago, and we'll change the direction a little bit and talk about financial monitoring. This past year, I was given the task of coming up with a risk assessment component for the 2018 evaluation instrument. I really didn't have anything to work with, so I sort of came up with something from scratch, and I handed it over to Renee and the committee. And they had a few minor comments, but I suspect there wasn't a lot of financial expertise on the committee, so they pretty much ran with what I gave them. And and what I tried to do in developing this assessment was keeping it as objective as possible. So basically, what we relied on primarily was what your auditor said about your organization. So we basically took your single audit and we scored it based on how you were, whether you got a clean opinion, whether or not how your auditor identified you as a low risk or not a low risk agency, and whether you had any findings. So we scored every single audit that came through. Now, some of our partners did not have a single audit, so we scored them a little bit differently. And assessed a preliminary scorecard to all of you. Now, the score is not a grade. It's you know, if you have a 0, that means you were considered a low risk partner by us. But if you have a score above 0, this is not a negative reflection on your agency. It does not mean you are not complying. It just means that relative to the other agencies within the CoC, your score is a little bit higher. So in terms of the selection process, after scoring everybody, we decided to make a cutoff of a score of 10. So anybody who had a 10 or who had above 10 were selected for financial monitoring. So how would you get above 10? So and if you look in your single audit, there's a summary page that sort of summarizes the findings and the opinion of the auditor. And on that page, your auditor classifies your organization as either being low risk or not being low risk. So there's a check mark based on what his selection is. And the uniform guidance gives guidance to your auditor in terms of how he identifies you. So if you were not identified as a low-risk agency, then you automatically had a score of 10. You're still not going to be monitored by us with that score. So the next component was if you had any findings, you'd have gotten additional points for each finding that you had. And so basically, for you to have been chosen for the monitoring, you would have, number one, not have been selected as a low-risk agency by your independent auditor. And number two, you had to have some findings in your audit. So that was the criteria that we used, which is very different than how we selected agencies for the program monitoring. And that also means that you may have been monitored by us within the past 3 years. We don't expect the financial monitoring to be as intrusive as the program monitoring. Well, Renee is laughing. So we're hoping that this is just something where you're going to have documentation readily available, and we can do most of it through a desk review. If you're interested in rescoring yourself, you can look at our assessment grading system. I'm guessing most of you will choose not to do that and take our word for it. But this was the point system that we use. Now we expect that now that everybody has been subjected to this for a year, that we might get some feedback in terms of how we did the scoring. But so far, most of the inquiries have been wanting to know how we scored, and there hasn't been any negative feedback at this point, although we might expect that in the future. So let's talk about, now that you've been selected, how we're going to approach this financial monitoring. So in your evaluation tool, there were 10 questions that related to grant management. My thinking is that every one of you answered yes or positively to that question. So essentially, we're just going to ask for a document or two to support your answer to the question. And since you've all answered positively to those questions, we expect that you have this documentation readily available, and it shouldn't be too big of a deal to compile it and send it to us. We're going to do this via SurveyGizmo, and I went through the SurveyGizmo questionnaire myself. And if you have the documentation on hand, it shouldn't take you more than an hour to fill this out, if that. So we don't think this is going to, again, be too intrusive upon you. Now, if you don't have some of that documentation readily available, you might have to compile it, and it might take you a little bit longer. So what we will do is we will contact you 2 weeks prior to when we will be monitoring. And so that will give you 2 weeks to go through the SurveyGizmo and upload the information to us. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the documentation that we are requesting. Again, this documentation supports your answers to the evaluation tool questions. And I will acknowledge that some of the terminology that we use may not be the terminology that you use. So there may be some confusion in terms of exactly what we want. I will go through each document now. You still may have some questions after this. Feel free to contact me either now or prior to your monitoring, and I'd be happy to walk you through exactly what we need. So the first thing we're going to ask for are your written policies, financial policies and procedures manual. You may call it something else. It might be standalone policies that you have that you can kind of like compile and pull together and upload each standalone policy. At All Chicago, we have all our financial policies in one document. So whatever document that you have or series of documents that you have that defines all your financial policies, that's what we would want uploaded. The second document that we'll ask for is your most recent expenditure report for, in this case, most people will be for the largest CoC grant. It may be for a different, not your largest grant, but we'll assume it's your largest grant. So essentially what we want here is the year-to-date report that you have for the grant that's selected, that lists by budget category the amount of actual expenditures that you've incurred for each budget category. This might be a report out of your financial system. This might be an Excel spreadsheet that you're tracking. But basically, this would be a year-to-date summary report of all the expenditures that you have for that project, summarized by budget category. So that's document number 2. The third document that we're asking for is a budget to actual comparison. And what we suspect is that this might actually be the same document that you submitted with item number 2. So in our system, in our financial system, we have our budget loaded into our financial software, so we could print budget to actual reports right out of our financial system. So that report would be combined. In your particular system, you might have this in a separate report. So either way, you'll have the option of either giving us one document that satisfies both of those requirements or 2 documents. Again, your budget year-to-date versus your actual expenditures year-to-date in comparison to where you are in terms of how much you have left to spend in the budget. The next item that we're going to be requesting is a voucher request package. The terminology here might differ in your organization, but basically every time you make a drawdown from locks, you're doing it for a specific amount. That specific amount should be supported by a transaction detail that adds up to that specific amount. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask you to, we're going to identify a month for your agency and say, give us your first voucher request package for that month that we select for the grant that we selected. And essentially, we're going to expect you to provide us with transaction detail to support the amount that was drawn down in locks. Hopefully you already have that report printed out for each drawdown, so this shouldn't be too difficult to take. The next document we will ask for is simply your bank statement for the account that you use to pay the expenditures for that particular grant. So if you have more than one bank statement in your agency, we just want the bank statement that will support the expenditures for the grant that we're looking at. So we'll ask for that. Also, for the month that we select, we're going to ask for your first payroll register for that month, and we're going to ask for any related timesheets and or activity reports that you have for any employee that was charged to the grant that we selected. The next document that we're going to ask for is your file retention policy. In our organization, our file retention policy is part of our written financial policies and procedures manual. So if that's the case, you do not need to upload a separate file retention policy. If it's separate, then we'll ask you to load that policy. We are also going to ask you for your finance department organization chart. If you don't have one, it's not a big deal. Just write down the names and maybe kind of show in a simple hierarchy. If you want to do it on a piece of paper by hand, that's fine. We just want to have some idea who does what within your organization. Related to that, we're going to ask you to submit a segregation of duty control checklist or grid. So you may have something like this in your agency that identifies who's doing what, and just so we can be assured that there is sufficient segregation of duties. If not, we have included in the SurveyGizmo a control grid that you can fill out. We think it's fairly easy to fill out. It covers 3 particular areas. It covers your receipts, it covers your disbursements, and it covers your payroll. You don't expect it to take too long to fill out. If you have any questions about it, again, contact me and I will help you walk through it. The final piece of that documentation that we will ask for, we want you to go into your Locks account and we want you to print out the 12-month activity for your most recently completed grant year for the grant that we selected. Now, I've been in Locks maybe 2 or 3 times since I've been here. I would not know how to do this. The good news is I have someone in my department who is in Locks all the time, And she and I sat down, and she showed me that, yes, this is something that you can get out of locks. I cannot explain it to you as we speak. If you have any problems, for you regular locks users, you're probably thinking, oh, yeah, that's really easy to do. For me, I don't know how to do it. So if you have any questions about it, you can contact me, and I will have Ashley help you prepare that. But basically, we want to see all your draw activity for a 12-month period for that grant. So that finishes all the documentation that we need, and I guess that finishes the financial monitoring component. So I will turn it back over to Renee.
Yeah, I think we have one question that I think is kind of for you, Steve, so it might be a good time to clarify it.
Sure.
Since it sounds like the 10 different items, they have to be pretty mindful of, like, some of them are specific months, some of them are for the last 12, like the last 12 months of the grant that was potentially completed. And I think kind of at the beginning, when you have most recent budget to actual report, could you clarify if like what year you will be monitoring? Or
so in that particular case, we want to look at the current grant unless it just started. So if we send out a notice to you next month that we're going to come out and do your monitoring, we would want to see your grant year-to-date activity through the month of April or March. If you haven't closed out April yet, that's also a possibility. Now, if your grant year begins in March or whatever, then you can just go back and give us the most meaningful report related to that grant. And we'll trust your judgment on this. I mean, if you give us something that's for the prior year and it's recently closed, you'd be happy with that. But we just want to make sure that you're monitoring your grant activity on a regular basis and tracking how you're doing against your budget. So, but I would say in general, if we come out, whatever the month prior to the month that we come out, your last closed month in your accounting system would be the month that we would want to look at.
Great, thank you. All right, so I'm going to hand this over to Jennifer for the post-monitoring procedure.
Hi, everybody. Now that you have a perspective of what the monitoring activities will look like, both on the program and the financial side, I'm going to talk about what will happen after the conclusion of the monitoring activities. So the first thing is that you will receive from All Chicago a summary report within 2 to 3 weeks after the monitoring has concluded. And this will contain some general feedback as well as outline any findings that were found in the desk audit, on-site client file review, or financial review. And it would be expected that you would follow up on and make any necessary changes related to those findings. Next, after you receive that summary report, we will work with you to identify any areas of need. So we view technical assistance as a collaboration. So we will work together to determine a work plan for any areas of need. The types of TA that might occur in a work plan would be referrals to trainings, providing you with sample tools or templates to use, maybe giving you feedback to strengthen any of your tools or policies, providing any HMIS guidance that's needed, and as well as referring you to any articles or outside experts that we're aware of. The technical assistance could be completed through a combination of in-person meetings, phone calls, as well as emails to share resources. Next, we would look at evaluating the process. So we're always looking to improve our procedures and get your input, which is especially important if you're going through this process with us. So after each monitoring component, we will send you a SurveyGizmo evaluation, and we'd like to get your feedback on what you thought and what you think could be improved. Additionally, as Renee mentioned, our goal is to help improve local evaluation scores through this process. So after the conclusion of the next evaluation, we'll send a survey to help determine if that happens. Of course, we'll also reconvene the work group that provided input to developing this process and present them with the results and see if they have further input on how it could be changed or improved. And as a result of these evaluation components, we'll make adjustments to the process for the following year. Now I'm going to briefly give you an orientation to some of the key features in SurveyGizmo, just so that you're familiar with how to utilize that. But before I do that, I just want to note that each of the tools are available in PDF format. So you'll notice that all the questions in the tools are required, and you can't advance to a new page without filling out the page that you're on. So sometimes it's helpful to work through the PDF version first and just prepare all your answers before going into SurveyGizmo. We do have a save and continue feature. So if you click at the top of the survey, there's a bar where you can click on save and continue, put in your email address, and you will receive a link that you can keep going back to every time you want to pick up where you left off, so that you don't have to do it all in one sitting. So just make sure that you do save that email that contains your link. Next, as Renee and Steve explained, some of these monitoring components require you to submit policies and documentation to us. So in SurveyGizmo, there is a tool for uploading files. So this screen shows an example of a question that asks for an upload. You would simply read the question, read the guidance, and then click on Browse, locate your file, and it would be uploaded. You also have the ability to upload multiple documents for each question. Next, at the end of each survey, you have the ability to review your responses on the screen and download a PDF version. This is your opportunity to keep a copy of the survey you just completed. So make sure you click on that download PDF link before submitting and save that PDF to your computer. The next steps from here are, first, we're going to talk about the time frame. Monitoring will occur from April to October. Agencies that were selected for either financial or program monitoring have been notified this week. And within the next 1 to 2 weeks, we will notify you of the month and deadlines for your monitoring. We will also, if you're receiving program monitoring, we will let you know whether you will be asked to do a desk audit and or the on-site client file review. If you haven't been notified that you're going to be monitored, but you are interested in receiving monitoring, you can fill out the self-selection form by May 15th in order to be considered for one of those slots. And some recommendations in order to help you prepare for monitoring. Review the monitoring policies and tools that are already up on our website. Review your recent evaluation instrument scorecard. Start locating the documentation that you'll need to submit. Work with your team, letting them know that this process will be starting and dividing up the roles and responsibilities. Think about the space that you'll use for your on-site client file review if that component occurs. And finally, let us know if you have any questions or concerns about any part of this process.
Yes, and I want to take this opportunity to apologize that we didn't start with saying if we've already selected you, that you've been notified. So if anyone was waiting until then to find out, we apologize. But your agency would have already received the email that you have been selected for the program or financial component. So thank you for being patient with us and a couple of people who have submitted the questions. So we will make sure to move that up in the slideshow next time. Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about frequently asked questions and then open it up for you guys to ask us other questions that you may have. So one of the questions is how do I schedule my monitoring review? So we will be sending an email notification to the agencies that have already received a notification that you've been selected within the next 1 to 2 weeks to establish, as Jennifer mentioned, the methods, dates, and deadlines. So we're hoping that that's no later than next week, but we definitely will get that out in the next 2 weeks. As Jennifer mentioned, we're really looking at some of you, we may be coming out in May, and some it might be closer to October. So the ones that we'll be going out to sooner, we will definitely be prioritizing getting that out next week so that you have that information. We also just want to be transparent about the fact that we want this to be a collaborative process, and so if we end up picking a month that really we think works best for us, but it doesn't work best for your agency, we are open to making those shifts so that it works out for both of us. Additionally, how long will the on-site file review take? As many of you probably know, if you do file reviews yourself or internally, or have ever done them, you know that this, depending on the project and the file you're looking at, it could be quick or it could take a while. So we're really going into this that we're going to ask to schedule for a full 8 hours to be on site. It's likely going to be at least Jennifer and I, but potentially other members from our team as well could potentially come, and so that could really allow us to take more or less time depending on that. We wanted to make sure that you guys were aware that we don't expect you guys to sit in the room with us for 8 hours when we're looking at the client files. But we will ask that just at least a staff member that's familiar with the files is around in case we run into questions or are having a hard time finding where you file a certain a document. So just to kind of alleviate any feeling of needing to watch us look at your files. Also, we will be providing you guys with a list of the client IDs at least a couple of days before the review, so that when we come out there that day, you're not provided with it just the morning of to find the files. Additionally, how will the monitoring affect your project's evaluation instrument score? So we want to make sure that you guys are aware that any findings we do come across during any of our monitoring review will not have a direct impact on your 2018 evaluation scores. Your scorecards are only being looked at as to what we've already seen. So definitely nothing to be concerned about there. However, we do want to just make sure that you're aware of the second bullet point here, which is that in some years, the Hearth Funding Opportunities Task Group has considered results of the former site visits along with the overall evaluation score when determining the ranking priorities through the NOFA process. But we're really looking at this, as Jennifer said, as more of an opportunity for us to just come out and get a deeper dive, offer our TA, and this is really not about coming out to try to find findings. So we want to make sure that you guys are taking a look at our monitoring page on our website, on All Chicago's website. So you'll see that it's on here on your screen. You'll go to the Continuum of Care tab, and then you should see monitoring as one of the drop-down pages that you can click on. On the monitoring page, you will be able to see, as Jennifer mentioned, all of the PDF versions of the SurveyGizmo tools. So if you've been selected for the financial component, you can go right now, take a look at what the PDF tool is. These PDFs are directly from SurveyGizmo, so they should match. The only thing that is not in SurveyGizmo, of course, is the on-site file review checklist. So that is not in there. But the policies that were also sent to you via email, if you've been selected, will also be on the website. And all of our contact information is up here. We're all willing to answer any questions or have a phone call with you, so you can contact us here. Our information is also on the monitoring page as well. So I think we would like to just open it up to see. We'll give some time for people to submit questions, or if you would prefer to talk to us, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you.
I do want to make a quick edit that my email address is incorrect on the slide. Thank you, someone, for noticing that when I didn't notice it myself. So my email is jfaddbrini@allchicago.org.
I'm sorry. That's my fault.
Okay.
Okay, so as you guys are submitting some questions, some people did submit questions throughout the presentation that we've been responding to, but sometimes you kind of want to know what your peers have asked. So we will share what some of those questions were and some of our answers. One was, have all agencies who will be monitored this year been notified? And we said yes, with the exception to those that will submit for the self-selection. Also, how many staff will complete the self-assessment, which is a really, really great question. And we recommend that it's a team effort and to complete it. And the self-assessment will be completed only one per agency, though. We don't want different people from your agency filling out the self-assessment and potentially giving us different answers. One of the things that we didn't talk about too much yet, or in the presentation, is that the self-assessment allows, after each section, for you to identify and kind of communicate with us any barriers that you're having to kind of making the improvements that you want, and barriers either at a project level, an agency level, a system level, or if you actually already have a plan in place where you know that this is an area that you guys want to be working on and you already have a plan or solution. So it kind of gives you an opportunity, if you're going through the self-assessment and you want to say, well, but I want to give more context. And that was feedback that we received from the work group specifically, that they said that they would really want to have that if they were doing the self-assessment themselves. And it's a good way just for you guys to potentially have that on record for yourself. There were a couple of questions about the financial scoring, and so our response to that was yes. Steve is happy to clarify any scoring with you, so you can contact Steve directly if you would like for him to just kind of explain why you scored the way you did. And then another really great question was, in the self-selection process, can the agency identify which of their projects they would want to have monitored? And yes, in the self-selection survey, you would be identifying the agency and the project that you would like to have monitored, as well as the different components. If you select the program component, you can even give your preference as to if you want all three, the three-tiered approach, the three methods, or if you're really interested in one or two of them. Okay, and then we have a question, will you make the program monitoring tool available ahead of time This will also be a good QA tool for program staff to use even if not being monitored. So yeah, thank you so much for that question. That was, our work group kind of said that too, that some of these tools were really helpful for them to just kind of take back and consider using. So yes, all of the monitoring tools are already on our website. So you can take a look at all of the client file reviews that we have up there. They're broken into different program model types, and the financial tool is up, the self-assessment tool is up, and the desk audit. So you guys are more than welcome to look at them, do any prep ahead of time. We want this to be something that, as you mentioned, even if you're not getting monitored, could be a great tool for you guys to just be working on ahead of time. So thank you for that question.
And I would just add to that a reminder that although the tools are posted, the SurveyGizmo links are not. So if you're going to be monitored, we will individually email you the SurveyGizmo links for actually submitting those tools. The tools that are posted are intended to be used to prepare.
Great. Yes, thank you for that. So the clocks in this room, I have a 1:59, a 1:56, and like a 2:03. So I'm assuming the average of that is that it's about 2 o'clock. That will conclude the end of our webinar, and we don't have any more pending questions at this time. So please, thank you. Someone said it's 2:03. So thank you for staying with us if you're still here. As we mentioned, this will be recorded, and we'll post that to the website as well. And please feel free to reach out to us with any questions. And thank you for spending the last hour with us. Bye.